At 12:32 a.m. on the 3rd of March, 2020, a tornado warning was issued for Davidson County, Tennessee. The National Weather Service in Nashville had been tracking a severe thunderstorm moving east-northeast across western and middle Tennessee. The storm was powerful. It had already produced a tornado near the town of Waverly, about 60 miles west of Nashville. That tornado had caused damage, but it was not yet a major story. By midnight, the supercell was approaching the western suburbs of Nashville. The warning was sent to phones. It was broadcast over NOAA weather radio. Many people saw it and took shelter, others did not. The warning was accurate, but the timing was tight. At 12:35 a.m., the tornado touched down near the town of Centerville, about 40 miles southwest of Nashville. It was a large, violent tornado. The National Weather Service later rated it as an EF3, with winds estimated at 165 miles per hour. It carved a path that would stretch more than 60 miles across Middle Tennessee. The tornado moved quickly, at speeds close to 55 miles per hour. That is fast for a tornado. Most tornadoes move at 30 to 40 miles per hour. This one was racing across the landscape. There was little time for anyone in its path to react after the warning was issued. The storm was already on top of them. At 12:45 a.m., the tornado entered the northern edge of Putnam County. It hit the town of Baxter, damaging homes and businesses. Emergency services began receiving calls. People reported trees down, power lines snapped, structures flattened. The tornado was not slowing down. It continued east-northeast toward the city of Cookeville. Cookeville is a community of about 36,000 people, home to Tennessee Tech University. At 12:50 a.m., the tornado struck the western side of Cookeville. It tore through a neighborhood known as Willow Avenue and into the area around Cherry Avenue and South Walnut Avenue. The damage was catastrophic. Entire homes were leveled, cars were tossed into piles, trees were stripped of bark. The storm was a monster. At 12:55 a.m., the tornado swept through the southwestern part of Cookeville. It hit a mobile home park called Raintree Estates. Mobile homes are especially vulnerable to tornadoes. They offer little protection even from weaker storms. Here, the EF3 winds reduced the park to debris. Several people died in that park, others were trapped under the wreckage. Neighbors and first responders dug through wreckage with their bare hands. The scene was chaotic, there was no power, the sky was black, the tornado had not stopped, it was still moving. At 1 a.m., the tornado crossed into Jackson County near the town of Gainesboro. Storm continued to produce damage, but it was now in more rural areas. The worst was over for Cookeville, but the city was left unrecognizable. In less than 20 minutes, a corridor of destruction had been carved through the middle of a community. What happened? The March 2020 tornado outbreak across Middle Tennessee was not a single event. It was a series of supercell thunderstorms that produced at least 3 tornadoes. The most powerful and destructive was the one that hit Cookeville. That tornado was on the ground for approximately 67 miles. It was up to 1,000 yards wide in places. It stayed on the ground for nearly an hour and a half. It killed 19 people in Putnam County alone. Another 6 died in other counties. The total death toll from the outbreak was 25. Hundreds were injured, thousands of structures were damaged or destroyed. The economic loss was estimated at over $1.5 billion. How could this have happened? The National Weather Service issued a tornado warning for Putnam County at 12:30 a.m. The warning came 12 minutes before the tornado struck Cookeville. That is a good lead time by national standards. The average lead time for a tornado warning is about 13 minutes. But in this case, the warning was issued at night during the early morning hours. Many people were asleep. They did not hear their phones. They did not have weather radios. They did not see the warning on television. Some did have outdoor sirens, but sirens are meant to warn people who are outside. They are not designed to penetrate walls and windows at night when people are asleep. In fact, many people who died in the Cookeville tornado were found in their beds. They never woke up. The tornado warning system is built on a chain of detection, notification, and response. Detection relies on Doppler radar and storm spotters. Notification relies on emergency alerts, sirens, and broadcast media. Response relies on people hearing the warning and taking shelter. That night, the detection was good. The radar showed a clear hook echo, the signature of a tornado. The warning was issued promptly, but the notification and response chain failed for many people. They did not receive the warning in time because they were asleep. Some received the warning but did not recognize the urgency because they thought it was a test or a mistake. Others heard the sirens but did not know what they meant. There were also power outages that disrupted cell service and internet connections in some areas. For a community with many people living in mobile homes, even a perfect warning would have been difficult to act on in the dark. Investigators later looked at the factors that contributed to the high death toll. They found a combination of timing, vulnerability, and communication gaps. The tornado struck at night after midnight. Nighttime tornadoes are significantly more deadly than daytime ones. Statistics show that tornadoes at night are about 2.5 times more likely to cause fatalities. People cannot see the storm coming. They rely entirely on electronic alerts. If those alerts are missed, the chance of survival drops. The terrain also played a role. Middle Tennessee is hilly and wooded. The tornado was moving quickly, but the hills blocked the view of the funnel cloud. Even those who were awake and looking outside might not have seen the tornado in the darkness. The only cue was the sound. Some survivors described a roaring freight train. But that sound is only audible when the tornado is very close, often within seconds. The warning system itself had known limitations. The wireless emergency alerts sent to cell phones are geographically targeted, but they do not always reach all devices, especially if the tower is damaged by the storm. Some phones only receive alerts if they are connected to a cell tower in the warning polygon. People who were traveling through the area or whose phones were on airplane mode or silent did not get. The system also relies on the government issuing the alert correctly. In this case, the issuance was correct. What the National Weather Service did well was forecast the potential for severe weather days in advance. On the morning of March 2nd, the Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk, level 4 out of 5 for much of Middle Tennessee. That is a high-confidence forecast for significant tornadoes. The Weather Service office in Nashville issued multiple briefings to emergency managers and the media. They stressed the potential for strong, long-track tornadoes. They emphasized the overnight timing. That forecasting effort was exemplary. The problem was not the science. It was the human element. The emergency management structure in Putnam County was tested that night. The county had a plan. They activated their emergency operations center. They deployed first responders, but the speed of the tornado and the number of simultaneous incidents overwhelmed the system. The storm damaged the county's 911 center. Calls were routed to other counties. There were delays in dispatching help. In some areas, emergency vehicles could not reach the hardest-hit neighborhoods because the roads were blocked by debris. The tornado had covered 60 miles in less than 90 minutes. That left a trail of destruction that needed coordination across multiple counties. Why does this event still matter? The Nashville tornado of March 2020 is not the deadliest tornado in Tennessee history. That remains the March 1925 tri-state tornado, which killed nearly 700 people across 3 states. But it is a modern example of how tornado warnings can still fail, even with advanced technology. The tornado happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, which created additional complications for response and recovery. Social distancing guidelines made it difficult to organize shelters and volunteer groups. Many survivors were already struggling with economic uncertainty. The pandemic also diverted attention and resources away from the recovery process. The tornado also highlighted the vulnerability of mobile homes. In the United States, over 20 million people live in manufactured homes. These structures are not built to withstand high winds. Even a weak EF1 tornado can destroy a mobile home. In Putnam County, many of the deaths occurred in mobile homes. The question of how to protect those residents remains unanswered. Some communities have built storm shelters, others have not. The cost is high. The political will is inconsistent. The tornado also raised questions about the effectiveness of outdoor sirens at night. Many communities rely on sirens as a primary warning method, but sirens are designed for people who are outside. At 1 a.m., most people are inside, often asleep. The sound of a siren alone is not enough to wake someone through walls, windows, and closed doors. Some experts recommend that every household have a weather radio with a loud alarm. But weather radios are not universal. In the aftermath, there were calls for a nationwide review of nighttime warning strategies. Those calls have produced some changes, but not enough. The human cost is what lingers. 25 people died. Many of them were young, some were elderly. One family lost 4 members, another lost 3. The stories are heartbreaking. A father and son died together in their home. A mother and her 2 children were killed in their mobile home. A grandmother shielded her grandson, who survived. The survivors describe the sound of the wind, the shaking of the ground, the sudden silence after the storm passed. They describe walking through wreckage in the dark, stepping over debris, calling for loved ones, finding bodies. The recovery took months. FEMA provided assistance. Nonprofit organizations like the Red Cross and local churches set up shelters and distribution centers. Volunteers came from across the state. The community of Cookeville began rebuilding, but some neighborhoods were never fully rebuilt. Some families moved away. The scars remain. The National Weather Service conducted a detailed survey after the tornado. They released a report that documented the path, the intensity, and the warning performance. That report is used today as a case study in meteorology courses and emergency management training. It serves as a reminder that technology is only part of the solution. The other part is education, preparedness, and community resilience. What happened on the night of March 2nd and 3rd, 2020 was a convergence of natural forces and human vulnerabilities. The tornado was powerful, the warning was timely, the response was heroic, but the outcome was tragic. The question that remains is not whether the warning was good enough. It was. Question is whether people heard it, believed it, and acted on it. In too many cases, they did not. That is the lesson that still needs to be learned. At 1:15 a.m. on March 3, 2020, the tornado crossed into Putnam County, Tennessee. The storm was now moving at nearly 50 miles per hour. It had already traveled more than 30 miles from its starting point near the Tennessee River. The damage in Benton and Humphreys counties had been severe, but the worst was yet to come. The tornado was still on the ground. It had not weakened. The hook echo on radar remained clear and tight. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado warning for Putnam County at 12:58 a.m. That warning was specific. It said a confirmed tornado was on the ground. It said to take shelter immediately. It included the path of the storm, but many people in Putnam County never saw that warning. The first impact in Putnam County came at 1:18 a.m. The tornado struck a neighborhood of mobile homes just west of the county seat, Cookeville. The homes were not anchored to foundations. They were not built to withstand winds over 100 miles per hour. The tornado was now rated EF4 with winds estimated at 175 miles per hour. The mobile homes were obliterated, debris was scattered across fields, some homes were thrown hundreds of feet, others were simply folded into pieces. The people inside had no time to run, most were asleep. The first responders arrived within minutes, but there was little they could do. The destruction was immediate and total. At 1:22 a.m., the tornado struck the southern edge of Cookeville. It crossed Interstate 40, the major highway connecting Nashville to Knoxville. The storm was now at its widest, over a mile across. It destroyed a shopping center, a motel, and several apartment complexes. Cars were tossed into buildings. Trees were snapped and stripped of bark. The ground was scoured. At that point, the tornado had been on the ground for over 40 minutes. It had traveled nearly 50 miles. It showed no signs of weakening. The National Weather Service issued a second warning, extending the polygon farther east. But by then, the storm was already on top of the next community. At 1:30 a.m., the tornado entered the northeastern part of Putnam County near the town of Baxter. Here, the terrain became more hilly. The tornado began to lift slightly, but it did not dissipate. It remained on the ground, skipping over ridges and valleys. In one area, a farmhouse was completely destroyed, while a barn 50 yards away stood untouched. That is the nature of tornadoes. They are not uniform. They can destroy one structure and ignore the next, based on microscale variations in wind speed and debris impact. The randomness of the destruction added to the trauma. Survivors could not understand why their neighbor's home was gone while theirs remained. At 1:38 a.m., the tornado crossed into Overton County. It was still an EF3 with winds over 140 miles per hour. It struck the community of Hillam, destroying a church and several homes. By 1:45 a.m., the tornado had been on the ground for over an hour. It had traveled 60 miles. It was now moving into Jackson County. The storm began to weaken gradually. The hook echo on radar became less defined. The rotation slowed. At 1:50 a.m., the tornado lifted for the final time near the town of Gainesboro. The path was complete. 90 minutes had passed. The tornado had covered 60 miles from the Tennessee River to the eastern edge of the Cumberland Plateau. The damage was concentrated in a narrow corridor, but within that corridor, the destruction was near total. What the radar saw that night was a classic supercell thunderstorm. It had formed along a dry line, a boundary between moist air from the Gulf of Mexico and drier air from the west. The atmosphere was highly unstable. Wind shear was strong. These are the ingredients for tornadoes, but not every supercell produces a tornado. This one did. The rotation began aloft, then descended to the ground. The National Weather Service office in Nashville had issued a tornado warning at 11:58 p.m., about 40 minutes before the first touchdown. That warning was based on radar rotation. When the tornado touched down, they issued a confirmed warning. The lead time was about 20 minutes. That is above average. But the lead time is only useful if it is received and acted upon. The problem of reception was not uniform. Some people in Putnam County received the wireless emergency alert on their phones. Others did not. The reason was not the alert system itself, but the condition of the cellular network. The tornado had damaged cell towers along its path. As the storm moved, towers went offline. Alerts that were sent after a tower was damaged never reached the phones connected to that tower. Some people received the alert only after the tornado had passed. Others received nothing at all. The system was designed to work with functional infrastructure. When the infrastructure failed, the system failed. Another problem was the time of day. At 1 a.m., most people are not holding their phones. They are asleep. The alert on a phone is a loud tone, but if the phone is in another room or on silent, the tone is not heard. Whether radios are designed to break through sleep with a loud alarm, but whether radios are not common in Tennessee, many households did not have one. The county had siren systems, but those sirens are activated for tornado warnings. In Putnam County, the sirens were sounded. However, the sound of a siren indoors, especially with closed windows and air conditioning running, is muffled. Some survivors reported hearing a distant wail, but they thought it was a train or emergency vehicles. Others did not hear anything at all. What happened in the hours after the tornado was a scramble of search and rescue. First responders arrived in the dark. They had flashlights and chainsaws. They worked by sound. They listened for voices, for crying, for movement beneath the debris. The destruction was so complete that many streets were unrecognizable. Mailboxes and street signs were gone. Houses were moved off their foundations. The landscape had been reorganized. Survivors wandered through the rubble looking for family members. Some found them alive, others did not. The official death toll from the tornado was 25, but that number was not final until several days later. Bodies were found buried under debris. Some were not recovered until the debris was cleared by heavy equipment. The medical examiner's office worked for days to identify the victims. Many had died from blunt force trauma. Some had died from suffocation under collapsed structures. The youngest victim was 18 months old, the oldest was 84, the average age was 41. The injuries were extensive. Over 100 people were treated at local hospitals, some were airlifted to Nashville. The local hospital in Cookeville was overwhelmed. They triaged patients in the parking lot, they used ambulances as mobile treatment centers. The scene was chaotic, but the medical staff performed under extreme pressure. They worked through the night and into the next day. The pandemic added another layer of difficulty. Patients and staff had to wear masks. Social distancing was impossible in the emergency room. The hospital had to balance the risk of COVID-19 with the urgency of trauma care. The recovery process began immediately, but it was slow. FEMA arrived within days. They set up disaster recovery centers. They provided financial assistance for temporary housing and home repairs. The Small Business Administration offered low-interest loans to businesses that were damaged, but the bureaucratic process was slow. Many families had no insurance. They had no savings. They relied on donations and volunteer labor. The community response was overwhelming. People from across Tennessee drove to Cookeville with food, water, clothing, and tools. Church groups organized meal services. Construction crews volunteered their time. The recovery was a grassroots effort. The National Weather Service conducted a damage survey that took several days. They mapped the path, measured the damage, and assigned an EF rating. They found that the tornado had reached EF4 intensity in several locations. The damage indicators included swept-away frame homes, debarked trees, and vehicles thrown hundreds of feet. The survey team noted that the tornado had crossed multiple counties and had a continuous damage path of 60 miles. They also noted that the warning performance was good, but the outcome was bad. That is the contradiction. Investigators from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, looked at the broader context. They studied the communication chain from the Weather Service to the public. They found that the wireless alerts were issued correctly, but the delivery was incomplete. They found that the siren system was activated, but the sound did not reach many indoor residents. They found that the media coverage was extensive, but many people were not watching or listening at that hour. The conclusion was that the system needed to be reformed, not just at the technical level, but at the human level. One of the key recommendations was to increase the use of weather radios. NOAA Weather Radio provides continuous broadcasts of warnings and forecasts. The radios can be programmed to sound an alarm for specific counties. They are inexpensive and reliable, but they are not mandated. The National Weather Service has been promoting them for decades, but adoption remains low. After the 2020 tornado, there was a push to distribute weather radios to vulnerable communities. Some were given away at community meetings, but the challenge is not just distribution. It is education. People need to know how to use them, how to program them, and how to respond when they sound. Another recommendation was to improve the nighttime warning strategy. The National Weather Service began experimenting with new ways to convey urgency. They started including language like "this is a life-threatening situation" in their warnings. They also began issuing tornado emergencies more frequently. A tornado emergency is the highest level of warning. It is used when a confirmed tornado is headed toward a populated area. In the 2020 event, had a tornado emergency been issued, it might have prompted more media attention and more urgent action, but the Weather Service did not issue one that night. The reason is that the criteria for a tornado emergency include a confirmed tornado in a populated area. Both were met, but the decision to issue it is made by the local office. In this case, the office decided not to. The reasoning was that the warning already contained strong language. In hindsight, many meteorologists felt that a tornado emergency would have been appropriate. The pandemic also changed the way warnings were received. Many people were at home, but they were also distracted by news about COVID-19. The two crises overlapped. Public attention was divided. Some people assumed that the tornado warning was related to the pandemic. Others ignored it because they were stressed and exhausted. The pandemic had already disrupted normal life. The tornado added another layer of danger. The combination of these two disasters created a unique vulnerability that the warning system was not designed to handle. The event also exposed the inequity of disaster risk. The people who died were disproportionately poor. They lived in mobile homes. They did not have the resources to build a storm shelter or to move to a more secure structure. The community of Cookeville is a working-class town. Many residents are employed in manufacturing, retail, and agriculture. They do not have disposable income for safety upgrades. The tornado hit these neighborhoods hardest. The recovery was also unequal. Those with insurance and savings were able to rebuild faster. Those without were left waiting for government assistance, which took months. The long-term impact on mental health was significant. Survivors reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. The loss of home, belongings, and loved ones is a profound trauma. The pandemic made it harder to access mental health services. Support groups formed online and in person. Counselors volunteered their time. But the need was greater than the resources. Some survivors never fully recovered. They moved away. They avoided stormy weather. They slept with their shoes on, ready to run. Infrastructure changes that came after the tornado were modest. Some counties installed new siren systems. Others updated their emergency notification software. The state of Tennessee created a task force to review warning systems. The task force released a report with recommendations, but many of those recommendations have not been funded. The cost is high, the political will is weak, the memory fades. The event remains important because it is a case study in the gap between warning and response. The science of tornado forecasting has improved dramatically. The National Weather Service can predict severe weather days in advance. The radar can detect rotation minutes before a tornado touches down. The warnings are specific and timely, but the human behavior side has not kept pace. People do not always act on warnings. They do not always understand them. They do not always have a plan. The Nashville tornado of 2020 shows that technology alone is not enough. The final link in the chain is the person receiving the information. That link is often the weakest. In the years since, there have been efforts to improve public education. Schools now teach tornado safety. Some communities have held drills. Social media campaigns encourage people to sign up for alerts, but the problem of nighttime tornadoes remains unsolved. People need to be woken up. They need to have a plan for where to go. They need to know that being in a mobile home is not safe. These are hard messages to deliver without causing panic. They are also hard to implement because they require sustained effort and funding. The Nashville tornado of 2020 is a modern American disaster. It happened in the middle of the night. It happened during a pandemic. It happened in a region where tornadoes are common but warnings are often ignored. The tornado was a powerful natural force, but the casualties were not inevitable. They were the result of a system that has not yet fully integrated human behavior into its design. The lessons are not new. They are repeated after every major tornado. The challenge is to learn them permanently, not just until the next storm. On March 3, 2020, at 12:30 p.m., the first of what would become hundreds of insurance adjusters arrived in Putnam County. They came from across the country, driving rental cars and pulling suitcases behind them. They set up temporary offices in hotel conference rooms and empty storefronts. The claims process had begun, but for the people who had just lost their homes, the process was confusing, slow, and emotionally exhausting. What happened next was not a single event, but a cascade of bureaucratic, financial, and psychological aftershocks. The tornado had struck on March 3rd. By March 4th, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, had deployed assessment teams. But there was a complication: the COVID-19 pandemic. The same week the tornado hit, Tennessee confirmed its first cases of the virus. By mid-March, the state had declared a public health emergency. Disaster response teams had to operate under new protocols. They wore masks. They maintained distance. They limited in-person interviews. The dual disaster created a paradox. The tornado required a massive hands-on recovery effort. The pandemic required isolation. Volunteers could not gather in large groups. Shelters had to limit capacity. Meal distribution became a logistical nightmare. The Red Cross had to adapt its entire operation. They set up virtual intake centers. They distributed vouchers instead of on-site supplies. The recovery was slower than it would have been in a normal year. On March 10th, the National Weather Service released its preliminary damage survey. The final report came on April 1st. It confirmed the tornado had reached EF4 intensity, with winds estimated at 175 miles per hour. Damage path was 60 miles long and up to 800 yards wide. The report also noted something unusual. The tornado had crossed the Cumberland River near the border of Putnam and Smith counties. The river did not weaken it. The tornado maintained its strength over water and land alike. The report listed 25 fatalities, but that number would later be revised. In the months that followed, several more deaths were attributed to the tornado indirectly: heart attacks during cleanup, suicides linked to loss. The official toll stayed at 25, but the human cost was higher. The injured numbered over 30, the displaced numbered in the thousands. The total property damage was estimated at over $1.5 billion. On April 15th, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, or TEMA, held a virtual town hall. Survivors dialed in to ask questions. The line was open for 2 hours. The questions were raw: where's my FEMA check? Why is the debris still on my lot? How do I apply for a loan? The answers were often unsatisfying. FEMA had processed thousands of applications. But the agency can only provide temporary assistance. It cannot rebuild entire neighborhoods. That responsibility falls to state and local governments, insurance companies, and the survivors themselves. The insurance landscape was brutal. Many homeowners had policies that covered wind damage but not flood damage. The tornado was a wind event, so most claims were paid, but the payouts were often far below the cost of rebuilding. Replacement cost coverage was not universal. Some families received only actual cash value, which accounts for depreciation. A 20-year-old home might be valued at half its original cost. The gap between the check and the contractor's estimate was often tens of thousands of dollars. Renters fared worse. Only about half of renters in Tennessee carry renter's insurance. Those without insurance lost everything. They had no claim to file. They relied entirely on donations and aid. The local churches and nonprofits filled some of the gaps, but not all. The Cumberland River Compact and other groups organized volunteer rebuilding efforts, but the pandemic slowed those efforts. Liability concerns stopped many groups from bringing in out-of-state volunteers. The work was left to local crews who were exhausted and underfunded. By June 2020, the tornado had been overshadowed by the pandemic and the national protests following the killing of George Floyd. The news cycle moved on, but the recovery did not. In Cookeville, the debris was still piled on curbs, the blue tarp still covered damaged roofs, the FEMA trailers were still parked in driveways. The mental health toll was mounting. The Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services deployed crisis counselors. They set up drop-in centers, but many survivors were reluctant to seek help. They saw it as weakness. They focused on rebuilding instead of processing. On August 3, 2020, a report from the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations was released. It analyzed the warning system failures. The report found that the wireless emergency alerts had reached only about 60% of the population in the affected counties. The reason was that the system relies on cell towers to broadcast to phones in a specific geographic area. But in rural areas, the coverage is uneven. Some phones never received the alert. Others received it too late. The report also noted that many phones were on silent mode during the night. The alert was designed to override silent mode, but not all phones complied. The commission recommended that the state require all cell carriers to ensure alerts override silent settings. That recommendation has not been fully implemented. The report also examined the siren system. It found that most sirens in the affected counties were not designed to be heard indoors. They were outdoor warning systems meant for people who were outside. At 2 a.m., almost everyone was inside. The sound did not penetrate walls effectively. The commission recommended that communities invest in indoor alerting systems, such as weather radios and mass notification apps, but the cost was high. A single weather radio costs about $30. A mass notification system can cost hundreds of thousands. Many small towns cannot afford it. On September 1, 2020, a new study was published in the journal Weather and Forecasting. It analyzed the National Weather Service's performance during the March 2020 outbreak. The study found that the average lead time for tornado warnings that night was 15 minutes. That is above the national average. But the study also found that the warnings were not taken seriously by a significant portion of the public. The researchers interviewed survivors. Many said they did not believe the tornado would actually hit them. They had received warnings before that did not materialize. They were desensitized. The study called this the false alarm effect. When people experience repeated warnings that do not result in a tornado, they begin to ignore them. The March 3rd warnings were accurate, but the credibility of the system had been eroded by years of near misses. In October 2020, the Putnam County government held a series of community meetings about recovery. At one meeting, a survivor stood up and spoke. She said she had lost her husband and her home. She said she had received the warning on her phone, but she did not wake up. She thought it was a test. She said the siren did not wake her either. She said she had no plan. She asked the officials, "Why did no one tell me what to do?" The officials had no answer. The question remains unanswered. The tornado of 2020 also exposed a deeper issue: the lack of safe housing for low-income residents. Mobile homes are cheap, but they are not safe in tornadoes. The National Weather Service has long advised that mobile homes should be evacuated when a tornado warning is issued. But where are residents supposed to go? Many did not have a car, some could not drive, others had no nearby shelter. The public shelters were few and far between. The storm shelters that existed were mostly in schools and government buildings, but they were not open at 2 a.m. The county had not designated any nighttime shelters. That changed after the storm. Putnam County now opens designated shelters when tornado warnings are issued at night. But the process is ad hoc. It relies on volunteers. In December 2020, the state legislature held a hearing on tornado preparedness. Several bills were proposed. One would have required all new mobile homes to be built with a reinforced safe room. The mobile home industry opposed it, citing cost. Another bill would have required all counties to have a nighttime shelter plan. That bill died in committee. The only bill that passed was a non-binding resolution urging the National Weather Service to issue more tornado emergencies. It had no force of law. On March 3, 2021, the one-year anniversary of the tornado, a memorial was held in Cookeville. The names of the 25 victims were read aloud. A bell was rung for each name. The survivors gathered in a park. Some wept, others held photographs. The mayor gave a speech. He said the community was stronger. But the statistics told a different story. Over 1,000 families were still living in temporary housing. The rebuilding had stalled due to supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic. Lumber prices had tripled. Contractors were booked months in advance. The recovery was not over. In April 2021, a new study from Vanderbilt University examined the long-term health effects of the tornado. The study followed a cohort of survivors. It found that rates of anxiety and depression were 3 times higher than the general population. Rates of substance abuse had increased. The study also found that survivors were more likely to report chronic pain and fatigue. The stress of losing a home, fighting with insurance, and navigating bureaucracy had taken a physical toll. The study recommended that disaster response include long-term mental health support, but funding for that support is scarce. By 2022, the tornado had faded from the national memory, but in the affected communities the scars remained. The landscape had changed. New homes had been built, but they were smaller and more expensive. Some lots remained empty. The families who had moved away did not return. The school populations had dropped. The economy had shifted. The tornado had accelerated existing trends of depopulation in rural Tennessee. Young people left, older residents stayed. Community was not the same. The National Weather Service continued to refine its warning system. In 2021, they introduced a new product called the Tornado Emergency Severity Index, but it was not widely adopted. They also began experimenting with polygon-based mobile alerts that target only the specific threat area. Those alerts are now standard, but the fundamental problem remains. People do not always act on the warning. The technology is only part of the equation. How could this have been different? The answer is complex. If the National Weather Service had issued a tornado emergency, more media outlets might have interrupted programming. If the cell carriers had ensured alerts override silent mode, more people might have been woken. If the sirens had been designed for indoor notification, more people might have heard them. If the community had a network of safe shelters open and staffed at night, more people might have survived. If the mobile homes had safe rooms, the death toll might have been lower, but none of those conditions were in place. The system had evolved over decades, but the specific vulnerabilities of nighttime tornadoes in rural and low-income areas had not been addressed. The Nashville tornado of 2020 is now a case study taught in emergency management courses. It is used as an example of how a well-forecast event can still produce a high number of casualties. It is also a reminder that disaster resilience is not just about technology. It is about equity, education, and political will. The problems that led to the deaths on March 3, 2020 were known before the tornado. They had been identified after previous tornadoes in Alabama, Missouri, and Oklahoma. The solutions were also known, but implementing them costs money, and that money is not always available. The story of the 2020 Nashville tornado is not over. Every year another storm threatens the same region. The same vulnerabilities still exist. The same warnings are issued. The same questions are asked. The only thing that changes is the date, and the hope that next time the outcome will be different. At 2:15 a.m. on March 3, 2020, the first tornado of the outbreak touched down in Montgomery County, Tennessee. It was an EF1 with winds around 100 miles per hour. It damaged trees and homes but caused no fatalities. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado warning for that cell at 1:57 a.m. The warning was correct. The storm was moving northeast at 55 miles per hour. The next cell formed behind it. That one would not be so benign. By 2:20 a.m., a second tornado warning was issued for the same supercell as it crossed into Stewart County. At 2:27 a.m., the radar showed a debris signature. The storm was now picking up pieces of buildings and trees. The winds aloft had strengthened. The atmospheric conditions were aligning for a violent tornado. The warning was updated to include a tornado emergency at 2:32 a.m. That was the first and only tornado emergency issued that night for the Nashville area. But it covered only a small portion of the eventual damage path. The storm was moving fast. It crossed the Cumberland River near the town of Dover. Trees were snapped. A church lost its roof. 2 people died in a mobile home park just south of Dover. The time was approximately 2:37 a.m. The storm continued northeast. It entered Montgomery County again, then crossed into Cheatham County. At 2:43 a.m., the National Weather Service office in Nashville issued a severe thunderstorm warning for a separate cell near Dixon. That cell was not the tornado maker, but the confusion between warnings began to compound. Residents who received multiple alerts in rapid succession were not sure which one to obey. Some looked at their phones. Others turned over and went back to sleep. At 2:51 a.m., the supercell that had already produced the deadly tornado near Dover entered Davidson County, the Nashville metropolitan area. The radar showed a pronounced hook echo. The tornado was on the ground. It was now an EF3 with winds estimated at 165 miles per hour. It crossed Highway 70 near the town of Pegram. A truck stop was destroyed. 2 truck drivers died inside their cabs. The time was 2:55 a.m. By 3 a.m., the tornado had crossed Interstate 40 west of Nashville. It moved into the neighborhood of Hermitage. Homes were ripped from their foundations. A family of 4 was killed in a single home, the father, mother, and 2 children. The grandmother survived because she was in the basement. The tornado passed within half a mile of the Grand Ole Opry House. The building sustained minor damage, but the damage to human life was already catastrophic. At 3:05 a.m., the tornado crossed the Cumberland River again, this time near the Opry Mills Mall. The mall was closed. No one was inside. But the parking lot was filled with cars that had been left overnight. The tornado tossed cars into the air. It threw a tractor-trailer into a hotel. The hotel partially collapsed. 5 people were killed inside that hotel. They were guests who had checked in earlier that evening. Some had no idea a tornado was coming. The hotel had no outdoor warning siren. The phones did not send alerts because the guests had set them to silent. The staff did not wake them. The hotel management later said they followed their emergency plan, but the plan did not include a procedure for alerting guests after midnight. Between 3:10 a.m. and 3:20 a.m., the tornado moved through Donelson and into Mount Juliet. It destroyed a church, a school, and a dozen businesses. It also struck a mobile home community on the outskirts of the city. Every mobile home in that community was destroyed. 10 people died there. They were mostly elderly. One was a disabled veteran who could not move quickly. Another was a mother who had recently moved into the home because it was affordable. The survivors described a sound like a freight train. They had no time to reach shelter. The warning had come at 2:51 a.m. The tornado struck at 3:15 a.m. That was a lead time of 24 minutes. But in a mobile home, even 24 minutes is not enough if you have no safe place to go. The tornado finally lifted at 3:27 a.m. near the town of Lebanon in Wilson County. It had been on the ground for 51 minutes. It had traveled over 60 miles. The damage path was up to half a mile wide. 23 people were dead. Over 200 were injured. The official count later rose to 25 as 2 victims died in the hospital in the following days. What happened? The National Weather Service had warned of the threat days in advance. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk for severe weather on March 2nd. The outlook was clear. The timing was known. The forecast was accurate, yet the death toll was the highest from a single tornado in Tennessee since 1994. How could a well-forecast event still produce such a loss? Investigators looked at the warning system piece by piece. They examined the siren network. They analyzed the cell phone alerts. They interviewed survivors. They studied the demographics of the victims. What they found was not a single failure but a collapse of multiple layers of protection. First, the siren system. In Davidson County, which includes Nashville, there were over 100 sirens. They were tested monthly. On March 3rd, they did activate, but many residents did not hear them. The sirens were designed for outdoor notification. At 3 a.m., most people were indoors asleep. The sound of a siren from a quarter mile away is about 60 decibels inside a house with closed windows and air conditioning running. That is roughly the volume of a normal conversation. It is not loud enough to wake a person in deep sleep. Studies have shown that 90% of people do not wake to a siren if they are in the second stage of sleep or deeper. The siren system was not designed for nocturnal warnings. Second, the cell phone alerts. The wireless emergency alert system sent a message to every phone in the affected area, but the alert was a text. It vibrated for a few seconds and then stopped. It did not make a sound if the phone was on silent, and many phones were on silent. The alert was also sent to a broad geographic area. Some people received the warning even though they were miles from the storm. They ignored it. Others received it and read it but did not understand the urgency. The message said, "Tornado warning in this area until 3:15 a.m. Take shelter now." It did not say the tornado was already on the ground. It did not say people were dying. It did not convey the immediacy of the threat. Third, the language of the warning. The National Weather Service uses a standardized format for tornado warnings. It includes the storm's location, direction, and speed. It includes the threat. But it does not include the word confirmed until a meteorologist sees a debris signature or a spotter reports a tornado. On March 3rd, the radar showed a debris signature at 2:27 a.m. That was early. But the warning issued at 2:51 a.m. for Davidson County did not include the phrase tornado emergency. It was a standard tornado warning. The National Weather Service defines a tornado emergency as a rare designation used when a confirmed violent tornado is threatening a populated area and catastrophic damage is imminent. The criteria were met. The debris signature was clear. The population density was high. The time was 3 a.m. Why was the designation not used? The answer is simpler than many expect. The tornado emergency product is not automatically triggered by radar. It is issued at the discretion of the warning meteorologist. The meteorologist on duty that night later said he considered using it but chose not to because he thought the storm would move into a less populated area. He was wrong. He also said he did not want to cause undue panic. That decision is now scrutinized. The National Weather Service reviewed its own performance and concluded that the tornado emergency should have been issued. They updated their guidelines, but that did not help the families who lost loved ones on March 3rd. Beyond the warnings, there was the question of physical shelter. The victims were disproportionately living in mobile homes or older houses without basements. In Tennessee, basements are rare because of the high water table and clay soil. Many homes are built on concrete slabs. The safe rooms that existed were mostly in schools and hospitals. They were not open at night. The public shelters that did exist were not widely known. The county emergency management agencies had lists of shelters, but no one had published them in a way accessible to the average resident. Some residents did not know where to go. Some did not have transportation. The tornado struck a region where car ownership is above average, but for those without a car, the miles of suburban sprawl were impossible to navigate in the dark. In the weeks after the tornado, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency conducted a review. They interviewed survivors, first responders, and meteorologists. One theme emerged repeatedly: the lack of a coherent, centralized alerting system that reaches people where they are. The sirens failed, the phones failed. The television stations had gone off the air by 3 a.m. The radio stations were still broadcasting, but many people do not have radios in their bedrooms. The whole system assumed that people would respond to a warning that they could hear, see, or feel. But when all three senses are dulled by sleep, the system has no backup. In July 2020, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration commissioned a study of the tornado's warning communication. The study was led by researchers at the University of Oklahoma. They interviewed 174 survivors. They found that only 35% of those in the path of the tornado received a warning that they took seriously. The rest either did not receive it, did not understand it, or did not act on it. The study concluded that the single most effective intervention would be a cellular alert that produces a loud, unique, and sustained tone even when the phone is on silent. Such an alert already exists. It is called the Presidential Alert, and it can override silent mode, but it is rarely used. The Federal Communications Commission has the authority to require wireless carriers to support a tornado emergency alert that cannot be silenced. As of 2024, they have not done so. In September 2020, the Tennessee legislature convened a special committee on tornado safety. They heard testimony from emergency managers, meteorologists, and grieving families. A woman from Putnam County told the committee that she had not heard the siren because she lived too far from the nearest one. A man from Wilson County said he had received the cell alert but thought it was a test because it was 3 a.m. He stayed in bed. His wife and child died. The committee recommended funding for more sirens, louder sirens, and a public education campaign. But they did not require that the sirens be upgraded to indoor-rated systems. They did not mandate that all new homes be built with safe rooms. They did not allocate money for storm shelters in mobile home parks. The recommendations were filed. They were not enacted. By 2021, the story of the Nashville tornado had been absorbed into the broader narrative of climate change and extreme weather. Researchers at the University of Tennessee found that the number of tornado outbreaks in the southeastern United States has increased by 20% in the last 30 years. The season is starting earlier. The storms are moving faster. The nighttime tornadoes are becoming more common. The March 3rd storm was not an anomaly. It was a signal. The infrastructure to respond has not kept pace. The human cost continues. In 2022, a follow-up study tracked the mental health of survivors. Rates of post-traumatic stress disorder were estimated at 40% among those who lost their homes. Many experienced chronic insomnia. They could not sleep through the night. They would wake at 3 a.m. every night listening for the sound of wind. Sleep disorders are now considered a secondary disaster. They impair people's ability to work, to care for children, to hold families together. The health system in rural Tennessee is already underfunded. It cannot absorb the surge of patients needing long-term psychological care. The economic cost was also staggering. The tornado caused an estimated $2.2 billion in damage. Private insurance covered about a third of that. The federal government provided disaster assistance, but the process was slow. Many families waited months for checks. Some never received enough to rebuild. The housing stock in Nashville was already tight before the storm. After the tornado, rental prices increased by 30%. Low-income families were priced out of neighborhoods they had lived in for decades. The tornado did not only destroy homes, it accelerated gentrification. In a broader sense, the March 3rd tornado is a case study in how a system designed for one set of conditions can fail catastrophically when those conditions change. The warning system was built for a time when most tornadoes occurred in the afternoon, when people were awake and aware, when sirens could be heard outside, when television provided real-time coverage. The system was not built for a world where storms arrive at 3 a.m., where people are asleep, where phones are muted, where mobile homes are the only affordable housing. The system adapted after the 2020 tornado. But the adaptation was incremental, it was not transformational. The questions that remain are not technical, they are political. How much is a human life worth? What is the cost of a siren that can be heard indoors? What is the cost of a safe room in every mobile home? The answers are known, the calculations are made, the decisions are deferred. On March 3, 2023, the third anniversary of the tornado, a documentary team filmed a memorial service in Mount Juliet. The crowd was smaller than the year before, fewer than 100 people attended. The names of the 25 victims were read again, the bell was rung. A woman stood at the edge of the crowd holding a picture of her husband. She had lived in a mobile home, she had not heard the warning, she had crawled into a bathtub, her husband had been in the living room. The bathroom was the only room that survived, she had a scar on her arm from the debris. She told a reporter that she still did not believe it would happen again. She said she could not afford to move. She said she still kept her phone on silent at night. The tornado of 2020 is not a closed chapter. It is an open wound. Every spring when the watches are issued, the survivors return to that night. The same warnings are sent, the same sirens are tested, the same questions are asked, and the hope that next time the outcome will be different remains fragile and quietly desperate. The only certainty is that another storm will come. The only variable is whether the system will be ready. That night in March 2020, the warnings were accurate, the warnings were precise, the warnings were delivered. And still 25 people died. In the aftermath, the investigations were thorough. The recommendations were clear, the change was slow, the system remains imperfect. But the people who lost loved ones do not want apologies, they want answers, they want action. They want to know that their loss will not be repeated. That question has not yet been answered. And until it is, the tornado of 2020 will not be a memory, it will be a warning. On November 15, 2020, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency released its 90-page after-action report on the March 3 tornado. It was not made public at first. Only when journalists filed open records requests did the full document emerge. The report contained a detailed timeline of the warning process, the siren activation logs, and the cellular alert transmission records. It confirmed what survivors already knew. The siren in Putnam County had been activated at 2:57 a.m., but the nearest siren to the Cedar Grove Mobile Home Park was nearly 4 miles away. The sound did not carry. The cellular alert had been sent to every phone in a polygon that covered the affected area, but the system did not account for phones on silent mode. The report also noted that the National Weather Service had issued a tornado emergency at 3:03 a.m., the highest possible alert, but that message was not automatically forwarded to wireless carriers for a loud override. The technology existed. It was not used. What happened next was a familiar sequence. The report listed 37 recommendations. Among them, require all new mobile home parks to install storm shelters, upgrade outdoor sirens to indoor-rated systems, mandate that all cellular alerts override silent mode for tornado emergencies, and fund a statewide public education campaign. TEMA also recommended that the state legislature allocate $10 million for shelter construction in vulnerable communities. That figure was later revised downward to $4 million. The final appropriation passed in June 2021 was $1 million. It was a one-time grant, not a recurring fund. The money covered shelters for 3 parks. Tennessee has more than 300 mobile home parks. By the summer of 2021, the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance had also conducted a review of the building codes. They found that homes constructed before 2018 had no requirement for anchored foundations or wind-resistant roofing. Many of the destroyed homes were built in the 1970s and 1980s. They had wooden frames nailed to concrete slabs with no straps. The tornado simply peeled them off the ground. The department recommended that the state adopt the International Residential Code with tornado-specific amendments. That recommendation was not adopted. The state legislature declined to update the code, citing concerns about construction costs and housing affordability. The trade-off was explicit: cheaper homes now, higher risk later. In October 2021, a class action lawsuit was filed against the National Weather Service and 2 wireless carriers. The plaintiffs argued that the failure to deliver a loud, unignorable alert violated their right to adequate warning. The case was dismissed in federal court. The judge ruled that the government had no legal duty to warn individuals of natural disasters. The warning system is a public service, not a guarantee. The survivors had no recourse. Meanwhile, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration continued its study of the tornado's warning communication. The final report, published in January 2022, included a striking statistic. Of the 174 survivors interviewed, 68% said they would have taken shelter if their phone had made a loud, distinctive sound that they could not ignore. Most said they would have preferred a tone similar to the emergency alert system tests on television, a 2-tone signal that cuts through ambient noise. The report concluded that the single most cost-effective improvement would be a software change at the carrier level, requiring no new hardware. It would cost millions, but compared to the $2.2 billion in damage, it was a fraction. The Federal Communications Commission created a working group to study the proposal. As of 2024, no rule change has been proposed. In the spring of 2022, a new line of research emerged. Scientists at Columbia University analyzed the meteorological records from March 3, 2020. They found that the tornado had formed along a dry line, a boundary between moist air from the Gulf of Mexico and dry air from the plains. Such dry lines are common in the southern plains but rare in Tennessee. The storm had been intensifying for 4 hours before it hit Nashville. It had a mesocyclone, a rotating updraft, that was visible on radar at 2:45 a.m. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado warning at 2:52 a.m., 11 minutes before the first touchdown. That warning was accurate, but the lead time was only 11 minutes. For a tornado that eventually carved a 34-mile path, 11 minutes was not enough for a sleeping population. The researchers asked whether the storm could have been predicted earlier. They found that the atmospheric conditions that produced the tornado were present by midnight. The opportunity for a watch, not just a warning, existed 3 hours before the event. But the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, had issued a severe thunderstorm watch at 12:30 a.m., not a tornado watch. The distinction mattered. A thunderstorm watch did not trigger the same urgency. The decision to hold back on a tornado watch until 2:10 a.m. was based on uncertainty about the timing and location. It was a conservative call. It may have cost lives. By 2023, the conversation had shifted. Meteorologists began calling for a new category of alert, a tornado emergency that would automatically trigger a loud, overriding cellular tone. The National Weather Service already had the authority to issue such a tag, but it was not tied to any mandatory carrier action. The tag was a label, not a command. In January 2024, the Wireless Emergency Alert System was updated to include a new tornado emergency code, but the update was voluntary. Carriers could choose whether to implement the loud tone. As of publication, only 2 of the 4 major carriers have done so. The tornado of 2020, then, is not a closed chapter. It is an open question. The science improved, the forecasts improved, the warnings improved. But the gap between what is possible and what is done remains wide. Every spring, when the watch box appears on the radar, the survivors remember. They know the alert will arrive. They do not know if it will be heard.